reason I love this demo so much is because when you separate it out, almost anyone can follow these steps from beginning to end. I'm Devin Elle Kurtz. I'm an illustrator. I've worked in the animation industry. I made a book, Windows to Worlds with 3D Total. I work in picture books. Today, I'm going to do a water painting demo. So like one of my favorite things to paint is the ocean. It's such like a challenging, in a really fun way, subject to paint because of all the different light effects in the water, the way that light refracts, and the way that things distort. Like I find it so interesting and fun. So I'm gonna do a top-down piece in water with some like sea creatures and show the way that I typically paint that kind of scene because I've done it a lot and I think I have some like cool tips and tricks that are easy to apply to make that kind of scene look really cool. If you're gonna paint something like water, one of my like #1 tips is just like start a Pinterest board with like all the references and put them all in front of you together. What I find is that when I want to paint something new, like 100% new from imagination, what I'm really doing is taking like 2% of this piece that I like and 2% of that photo that I like and like combining it together into something totally new. There's this thing that happens often where when a shark goes through shallow water, all the fish in the water scatter away from it. Like it's this really cool effect. I want to do like kind of a cool like diagonal composition where I've got like the shark kind of coming in, maybe here, swimming through the water. It gets some cool motion. And then I want to get the fish scattering every which way. So there'll be like a kind of like a force field around the shark with fish that are scattering off in every direction like this. I really want to focus in on the way that the fish and their shadows are going to interact with the ground underneath the shark. I was thinking of doing a zebra shark. They're small, they're in shallow water a lot. They're like really cool white sharks with like black speckles, and I'm probably not going to get it that scientifically accurate here, but I'll do my best. I painted a picture book all about sharks, and I'm sure the author of that book will be able to tell me what I've gotten wrong with this shark later on, but I'll do my best to make a cool shark here. Really want a fun gesture, maybe like a dramatic tail swoosh like this. Get those fins spread apart, really getting that kind of motion. So something really cool about painting with shallow water is that the creatures in it are gonna impact the ripples that we see on the surface of the water. So I'll be able to show the motion of this shark and the motion of the scattering fish around it through the way that I paint the ripples. We'll get some fish all through here. I think I'll make a fish brush once I finish getting the basic colors in and whatnot. Yeah, this is the composition I'll go with. We'll get some really fun ripples in there, and I'm just gonna start blocking in the basic colors here.
If you want to enhance your digital art skills, be sure to check out our Digital Painting Fundamentals course at proko.com/digital painting, where you can learn from artists like Marco Bucci, Bryce Coe, Tiffany Mang, and more.
I think it'll be fun to do a very like muted cyan kind of backdrop. So get that kind of a color in. And then one thing I really like about the shallows is that we can get this really, really beautiful gradient transition from like the cyan shallows into the kind of warm yellow into like white sand that's peeking through on the side here. So I'll start with something like this, like just a nice gradient transition. And then the next thing I like to do is to paint the light refractions under the surface. What I like to do for that is I'm gonna use an overlay layer initially. And I'm gonna grab a brush that has some transfer settings, which let me show you what that is. So in Photoshop, in the brush settings panel, this transfer option here, I like to use this for painting like really any brush that has this like transfer option enabled. It lets you get these like strokes that go from like heavy to light, pretty much from like how hard you're pressing. That is the kind of brush that I want for painting this. And then I'm also actually, let me put my brush settings over here. I'm also gonna turn on some of the shape dynamics here, and that will let it go from like a small light brush to when I press hard, it will put like a lot of pigment down. I recommend getting some reference for this step, but first I like to paint flat these water refractions. So essentially this is like the light going into the water, and I'm not a physicist, so I can't explain exactly why this happens, but the way that pockets of like water form together, like with the physics of it, it creates these beautiful patterns like this all across the underside of the sea and anything underneath the ocean. So I've done this a lot, so like I kind of know what the patterns look like, but I recommend getting some reference up for this, because like depending on the depth of the water and the way that it's moving, like you're gonna get different patterns. But essentially they're kind of like wiggly boxes, and I'm just gonna go through and I'm gonna do like bigger ones here first. So I'll start with kind of like the larger shapes, and then I'll work my way down towards smaller shapes over the course of painting. And then once I get enough here that it feels pretty good and like pretty dense, what I like to do is take this and duplicate it and transform it around, and no one will ever know that I'm just using the same thing that I already did. Shh, like don't tell anybody, you know. But you know, I like to do the like work smarter, not harder thing. Like once I get some paint down that looks the way I want, I'll just go and like free transform it and duplicate it and make it work for me, you know? Like when it's something like a pattern like this, I like to just grab sections of it and spin it around, and as long as you like mix it up enough with like other marks that you make yourself, it's hard to tell that it's been copy and pasted, you know, it's been reused. And I do this for all kinds of stuff. I love to take sections of my art and copy and paste them and transform them. I'm so here for cutting corners and making it happen faster, you know? Because I think the thing is, like, for me, I'm such like a concept person. Ultimately, like what I love is like the story and like the concepts and like coming up with like a cool new image. And I love like finding new ways to make that happen faster. So I do a lot of this, and I post a lot of like TikToks and reels on my like Instagram and TikTok, and you'll see me like cutting out sections of it and dragging it around, copying and pasting it, using it for different places in the image. And look how fast we can make this come together. Let me do that again. Let me grab another section from over here, and let's spin this around, put it down here, finish off these edges over here. And then once I get this to a place that I like it, feel like it looks pretty good, I'm gonna go ahead and run a motion blur on it, something like that. It like blurs it out a little bit. And then the next thing that I'm gonna do is, let me actually duplicate this. I like to save a version of it where I haven't done this, but I like to go up to blur gallery and do a field blur. And then I'll erase this out in some places, but the field blur, like this like bokeh effect, which is like a photography effect, but it looks pretty cool. Like I like the way that it looks. So I'll add this in some places. So let me erase some of it in like here and there to get this kind of like glowing base. So I'm starting to build up these pretty light patterns throughout the water. And so there's my first layer of these like light effects. I'm gonna turn the opacity down a little bit, turn it down to like maybe 60% or so. Now I'm gonna do a more refined layer of the same thing on top. So I'm gonna also grab another overlay layer, and I'm gonna essentially like go over these and add some smaller lines throughout these in some areas that will just make them a little more impactful. I want it to feel organic, but also support the composition. You know, whenever we're painting something like this, like, you know, a little piece of concept art, whatever, it's always a dance between getting it to feel organic and natural and also getting it to support the composition. Because like what I want ultimately is for the eye to be led around the piece toward the front of this shark here. So I'm gonna put heavier contrast, like more of these like little fine light marks, kind of pointing to the shark. I'm choosing places here where I can use lines. I can create these lines, these hidden lines that are actually, they're like functioning as little arrows. Like I find places that I can follow these light patterns. It's almost like I'm pointing to the shark with it. But I want to do it randomly enough that it doesn't feel like I'm drawing a big arrow all over it. It's a dance between supporting the composition and bringing the attention where you want it, but then hiding your work like a magician. You know, like we don't want to show our hand. We don't want to show the trick too easily, but we still want to use the trick because we want to wow everybody. So there is my first and second like light pass, and I'm gonna go ahead and put a little motion blur on them too, a little bit less. And so the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab a soft light layer and a darker color. Hold up, I'm gonna add flow jitter, that will make it a little softer. I'm gonna go into some of these little areas here, and I'm gonna start painting a darker color in the middle of these spaces between the light. So I'm slowly building up this pattern of like light refractions dark colors and light colors all over the ocean floor here, these shallows by the shark. And again, I want it to feel kind of random, but also be in support of the composition. I especially want some contrast, like right around the area where the shark is. Got to get some heavier contrast in there. And I like to use these blending modes because it lets me kind of build up pigment on the canvas like slowly over time, which is a little easier for me. Like I like doing a little slow build of the color, something like this. So we're starting now to get like a believable feeling like ocean floor here. This is kind of like my base for the light patterns. I'm gonna actually turn the opacity on it down a little bit, maybe something like that. And then I'm gonna fill in the shark real quick. I'm gonna use the lasso tool for this and actually redo that with anti-aliasing. If you're having issues with your lasso tool creating jagged edges, you probably just need to turn on anti-aliasing. That's like one of the #1 questions that I get. Because I use the lasso tool so often, and I think a lot of people try it themselves and they get these jagged edges on their art. That is just this little checkbox right here. And I'm just holding down Shift so I can keep adding to my existing lasso shape. And then if I want to remove from it, I will hold down Alt. And I just kind of dance between holding down Shift and Alt to like add and subtract from my lasso shape. And that looks pretty good. I like the overall silhouette of it. So I will name one of my layers and drop in the base color, maybe something like that. These sharks have really, really cool patterns on them that I'll paint in real quickly. So they get darker around the fins here. And then they've got a fin all on their top here that goes down their back that creates a dark pattern like that. Tail gets a bit darker and the back fins get a little bit darker as well on the tips here. And then I need to do the spots on it. I'm gonna grab a different brush for that. Cover this bad boy in the spots. I love to paint spotted sea animals, but doing the spots definitely takes a little bit of time. Let's see if I can just do that and that. Get those spots on the fins, something like that. And then I want to do a little shading pass on it. And I'll use kind of like a blue color, like a muted blue color. We'll decide that the sun's coming in from over there, and I'll shade on this side of it. Mainly because I want the shadow to be cast this way. Get this shark in. And then my shadow hack that I do every time I paint something in the water like this is I grab the silhouette, I just Command or Control click on the shark layer right here, and then I make another layer underneath, set it to multiply, fill it in with my shadow color, and then I drag my shadow. Let's not auto select. There we go. Had to turn auto select off. There we go. Just drag my shadow out like this. So that's what I want. It's showing the depth of the water, essentially. Got that same shadow color that I used on the shark itself. And now I'm gonna just like fog out some of these edges a little bit, blur them out, make them look a little less perfect. I have the brush tool and I've got those same transfer settings that I was talking about. So when we turn these on, even both of them, it just makes a really smooth brush that we can use. It's funny, I started doing digital art so long ago that I did digital art before the blur and smudge tool were good. All the kids who learn in the last like 5 years, they use them all the time because they work. But back when I was a kid, the blur tool and the smudge tool were terrible. Like we didn't touch them because they were like unusable because they functioned so poorly. So now I feel like my technique, I still don't use them very much, but I will be using smudge to paint the ripples, and I'll show you that in just a bit. All right, so something like that. Oh, and a cool little trick you can do is with the shadows, you can show some of the shape of the ground. So if I want to like eventually have it look like there's some like little pits and valleys in the ground that the shark is kind of swimming on top of, I can show that by the shape of the shadow here. So like I can make the ground go down here, you know what I mean? And show that there's like an up and down landscape beneath the shark, something like this. And then I'm gonna grab this shadow shape, run a select inverse, and make sure that my light refractions like that aren't peeking into my shadows as much. The light like gathers around the edge of the shadow. I'm not a physicist, I don't know why this happens, but I see it in reference images a lot, is you get this really cool, almost like rainbow light effect, like right around the edge of the shadow here. So just create kind of a cool little thing like that. Actually like bleed in a little bit of this warmth around the edges of the shadows. That looks really cool. I always love doing that. When you start looking really hard at the reference, you see all these really cool things that you can add in. Like it's so fun to like look really hard at like one little subject like water and find all these little intricate things that you can add in that just make it feel like that much more real. Cool, let's make a fish brush. I make a ton of brushes. I love making brushes. And one thing I like to use brushes for is to speed up my workflow. If I'm painting the same thing over and over again, like I want a million fish like fleeing in every direction, rather even than copying and pasting, I'd rather just make a brush that I can paint fish with essentially. I have a bunch of brush packs actually on Gumroad. They're all free with like optional donations. So if you guys ever need any like foliage brushes, other kind of painting brushes. All right, so I'm gonna make a new layer and I'm gonna fill a section of this canvas with white, because the way you make brushes in Photoshop is you create a black silhouette on top of white. So I just want a pretty basic fish shape. I'm gonna get some mirroring going so that we can get a fish and get some fins in there, something like that. That's gonna be one fish brush. I'm just gonna go up to edit, define brush preset, and then I'm gonna make one more, and then I'll show how I like edit them and make them into like a cool usable brush. So for the other one, I'm going to turn mirroring off or symmetry off. I'm gonna make it like in motion, do one that has some like motion to it, kind of like this. And then I'll do the same thing again, edit, define brush preset, turn that off. So let me grab my first one. So right now we have a stamp where essentially when you put it down, it's just like one stamp shape, right? But I need to turn this into a brush I can make strokes with and make a bunch of fish with. So here's what I'm gonna do. Turn transfer off. First I go into the brush tip shape and I'm gonna point it down and open up the spacing. Or actually I'm gonna turn it up like that to 90. And I turned the spacing, I opened the spacing up. So I made the spacing really wide. So now we have this kind of a brush, and I want to then go to angle jitter and make it follow the direction of my stroke. So now I have fishes that follow my brush stroke. And the next thing that I want is some color variation in my fish. I'll grab kind of a color that's similar to what I want, but then I'm gonna go up into my brush panel and turn color dynamics on. And I'm gonna increase the hue jitter, saturation jitter, and brightness jitter. So now the fish that I'm drawing have different colors to them. So it's doing a lot of the work for me and creating variation. And so variation is a really big thing that it's gonna make it not look too like digital. And by digital, I just mean too like stiff, you know what I mean? And inorganic. Like I still want it to feel like it's touched by an artist, right? So more variation we can add is a little bit of angle jitter. Angle the fish slightly differently so they're not all facing exactly the same way in the line, right? Add some size jitter so they're not all exactly the same size fish. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of scattering too, so they're not in like a perfect line. I think that was a little too much angle jitter, maybe like that. So now what we've got is a bunch of fish that I can just go like this with. I've got this fish brush and I can create these scattering fish going every direction like this with a single stroke each time. Here's kind of my plan for like the different angles here that I want. Get these fish scattering like every which way. Let me save a copy of this brush real quick so I don't lose it. But then I can go back to scattering and I can increase the count like this and add more scattering. And now I can do the like thick fish on the edge here. Because what I really want is there's this really fun effect that happens where it's like this giant crowd of fish that's all like trying to flee away from this shark here. Like this. Yeah, there we go. That's what I want. And then let's get some lighter ones. Make my color a bit lighter, get some lighter fish in there and some darker fish in there. Actually, that's a bit too dark, not quite that dark. And then let's make them a bit more color coordinated here. Use a soft light layer to kind of group the color a bit more, maybe into something like that. Yeah, pretty cool. And then let me add a multiply layer too. I just want to group the color a bit more. Maybe with like a green, something like, yeah, I think that's feeling good. That's feeling good. Okay, cool. So now let me grab that other fish brush that I made, this one here. And I don't want all the fish to feel like exactly the same, you know? I want them to feel like there's some like variation in there. So this one I am just gonna use as a stamp, but I'm gonna have this open and turn off all the scattering and stuff. And this one, I could just change the direction of it and like use it as a little stamp here and there, just so that the fish aren't all exactly the same. And if I go into shape dynamics here, I can hit the flip X thing as well, and then some of them will go the other way. Like you can see that one just went the other way. And I can angle the fish different angles like this. I just want it to not look inorganic. I want some of the fish to be like going slightly different directions, get a feeling of swimming in there, something like that. Cool. We've got our shark, we've got our fish. Now we need fish shadows. The fish need to cast shadows too, same thing. So I'm gonna grab all my fish here. I'm gonna do the same thing once again, where I get the shadow color, something like this. Fill in on a multiply layer underneath all my fish, and then I will drag this down as well. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and fill in with a soft brush, get rid of that like line that was there. Fill in the edges, something like that. All right, that's fun. This is fun. All right, cool. This next step is like my favorite part. Like this is what I'm like waiting for the entire time I'm doing one of these pieces, which is the water ripples, because it's so fun and it's so easy. So the first thing that I want to do is plan out the water ripples. I actually want to figure out where I want them in the piece. So I'm going to grab a brush kind of like this. Let me grab a red color. The water ripples are actually like 100% impacted by the motion of the animals going through the water underneath. So since the shark is kind of swimming like this, it's going to be pushing the water with its head like this. And these will open up as it goes out. And then this fin maybe is creating some ripples that are coming out this way. And the tail will be pushing water out this way. So we can actually show like the motion of the animal with the ripples, and they'll be closer together right up near it. And then the ripples open up as they move further out. They get further and further away. And so these will be kind of soft. These will be kind of our main ones here. And then the fish will be pushing water as well. So here's my ripple plan. I like to plan it out because it's a little hard to see what we're doing when we're just smudging it. So I'm gonna turn that off for a minute. I'm gonna select everything and I'm gonna run a copy merged. So this is everything that I've done so far. And then I'm gonna paste it on top of my existing layer structure. So I like to work non-destructively, which means I try not to delete my layers as I go. I try to always save them in case I want to edit something later. This definitely came from my years of animation where like we need to save everything because it might change at any point, right? But I think it's really useful to have the layer structure. This, what we've got here, is a copy of everything. Like you can see, this is everything I've done so far. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn on my ripple plan, and I'm actually gonna grab the smudge tool, which that would be right here. I'm gonna grab a brush that's like this. This is a good smudge brush. I'm gonna set it to 60%. Actually, I'm gonna set a little bit less than that, maybe like 40. We're gonna smudge in the pattern of the ripples here. Let me turn my transfer settings up, something like that. I like to use a smaller brush toward like the front of it here, and then I'll slowly make the brush bigger. And you can see I'm going through and I'm actually smudging like everything. I'm smudging all of the paint, the fish, the shark, everything. Smudging it all in the pattern of the ripples. So here, it starts looking like water so quickly. That's why I love this technique. It's so fun. You get this real feeling of like water caustics and like motion through the water in like no time. So now I've done my smudging. I've done my like basic smudging. The next thing I'm gonna do is following the same plan. I'm gonna turn the opacity down. I'm gonna make a multiply layer on top. And I'm gonna grab a pale kind of off-white color, and I'm gonna go ahead and reinforce the same ripple patterns. So it's gonna just make it look even more impactful, essentially. So I'm just gonna go ahead and follow these same patterns and kind of turn it off and turn it on all through here. Get these tail ripples like that. Get these ripples up here. Get this ripple on from this fin coming out. This is the main one where it's like pushing it with its head here, kind of pushing the water out of its way. And let me do the same thing I was doing earlier, which is running a motion blur on everything like that. And then I'll turn it down. And just like before, I like building up slowly. I like to build up the light and dark slowly over time. I'm actually gonna grab an airbrush this time to get a little softer. Just building up the feeling of these ripples in the water. And I'll group these, turn the opacity down. And we can do the same thing with lighter color. So grab a screen layer, grab kind of like a light blue, or actually a dark blue for a screen layer. And the same thing again, just going through, showing the pattern of the ripples, and we'll turn it down. I just like doing the slow build of pigment on the canvas over time. Something like that. Awesome. Let's darken these edges. Looking at it compositionally now that all the components are in place, I want to kind of turn down some of the contrast out here and create almost like a spotlight effect on the shark as it like swims through this water like this. One thing I want to do actually though is I want to bring some of these light patterns back on top of the fish. So I'm going to duplicate this group here, bring it up on top of everything, and just erase a little bit in here just so that it feels like there's still some of the light caustics coming through like that. And then I also want to strengthen kind of the shadow up here, the feeling of the fish shadows. So let me grab this color here and find a few little places where I can really enforce that these fish are casting like a thick kind of shadow line up here. Something like that. Just get this kind of cool circular division around the edge of the canvas. Yeah, just get some of these little fish shadows working for us, creating a feeling of depth through the water. Okay, cool. So the next thing that I like to do is around like one of the edges of the canvas, I like to start bringing in some sun on the water, like on the surface of the water. I think I'll try using a hard light layer for that with kind of a blue color. And we'll start just creating a ripple pattern here, bringing it in from the corner that this is on top of everything. You know, this is creating a feeling of light hitting the waves on the ocean.
How many brushes do you think that you've made for painting light on water?
Oh, I just use a basic like round brush for that usually. The brushes I usually make are like practical ones. So like leaves or like grass or like fish, like something like that. For painting, I use really basic brushes. Like I feel like I just like use like whatever I can grab that has some like transfer settings enabled or something like that. I love Greg Rutkowski. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he has oil painting brush packs. They're so good. Those are like, for Photoshop, those are like some of my favorites. And then the Kyle Webster brushes that come with Photoshop subscription, those rule too. Those are so good. Yeah. So yeah, like something like this, just creating this feeling of the ocean, you know, of like seeing the ocean from above, of like actually getting some waves coming in. Let's get a color like this. I want to actually like make it hard to see underneath, I think. Kind of like this. Something like that. Yeah. All right, cool. It's feeling good. All right. So we've got that coming in from one side. Then on the other side here, I want to use a multiply layer to really kind of like strengthen the side of ripples over here. So again, kind of still going along with this plan that I made initially, working in some surface ripples, essentially just like bringing light in from one end and bringing shadow in from the other end, more or less. All right, the next thing I want to do is I'm just going to go in here and start doing some rendering on top of this. Like this is the basic building blocks I do for everything. From here, it's more or less rendering. There's a few little tricks that help with like the rendering process that make it pretty cool that I'll talk about as I go. For example, using a color burn layer. So the color burn blending style, it just like increases the color in this really cool way. And so I like to come through and use it where I want to like increase the contrast here. Something kind of like this. I like to use it in that same kind of like light and dark pattern, still following the light refractions in the water, but just coming in and increasing the contrast right near where the shark is. So just bring attention there. Because like ultimately I want this to be my focal point of the piece. So now that I've got all the pieces of the image in, I can focus on increasing the contrast in my focal area and decreasing it everywhere else so that I can subtly draw the eye into the shark and the main area of the painting here. And then I can add a little bit throughout to hide my work a little bit. And then let's darken this up over here, like I mentioned. Not too much, just a little bit. All right, that's pretty cool. Another fun trick is giving usually like a hard light layer or something, creating some little points of sun hitting these waves up here, just like this. It can be such a nice look. It is such an easy thing to do. Usually on the edge of water ripples, we'll see these little pockets of light like this. So I'll do kind of a little array of them over here, something kind of like that, turn that down. And then I can go in and I can do speckles. So I'm gonna grab just like a basic brush and then turn some scattering on, turn the count down though, and add a lot of spacing. So now I have some like little speckles like this, adding in little speckles around it, little bits of sparkle and shine. That can look pretty neat too. You'll see that in my water paintings pretty often. I love making it just look like sparkly, something kind of like that. When light refracts in water, you actually get these really cool pockets of rainbow light, especially around shadows. Again, I don't really know why this happens. I just see it in a photo reference and I like adding it in. So I'll add like maybe 20 pixel feathering on my lasso tool here. So I've selected a little area on the edge of the shadow of the shark. And then if I go to my gradient tool, there's usually an iridescent, there's this rainbow right here. I usually use that. And I just like drag a little rainbow out and then set it to overlay or soft light. And it creates a really beautiful, just like little rainbow effect. I don't know, it's like subtle, but I think it looks really nice. So I love adding this in. I think it makes ocean scenes look so sparkly and beautiful. And I'll just like go along like the edge of my highlights here. Again, kind of like choosing little paths that point to the shark a little bit, adding in some rainbow. Yeah, there we go. Love that. Let me adjust my values a little bit. I feel like I need to darken this guy and kind of bleed out that darkness around it a little bit to show that it's casting a shadow in that direction. Something kind of like that. Makes it feel like it's like sitting in water a little bit more. Like, oh, let me turn that off and on. I use a luminosity layer for that. I just like to kind of blend out the edges a little bit into the water. Really makes it feel situated in the water. Can't say why exactly, but it does. Yeah, I mean, honestly, from here, it's really just a matter of like rendering it as much as you want then. Maybe I'll spend like just like 10 minutes like rendering on this a little bit. And if anyone has questions, I could answer them while I'm doing that.
I'm curious what goes through your mind when you're rendering, like what is your main focus? Because your visual impact is there already. So now what are you thinking as you move into the rendering phase?
That's a great question. I think it depends on what the purpose of the piece is, because you're right, like the concept is all there. We know what it looks like. And if this was like a really early concept for like a show or a movie or something, I might stop here. Like if this is a color key for a scene, you know what I mean? This might be all we need. This might be all the information we need. But then if I want to instead take this and turn this into like a full illustration, probably at this point, what I would actually do is like, okay, this is a great concept. I might go in and clean up everything. So go in and like clean up all my silhouettes, try to like add some more interesting fish silhouette shapes. Like if I wanted to turn this into a full illustration, I would go in and do every step again, but with a little bit more specificity. So like, you know, how can I make these fish look like there's a bunch of unique ones in there? You know, maybe add little bits of shine that make it feel like real, you know what I mean? Add like secondary and tertiary points of interest. So, you know, I've got my main focal point. Maybe I'm like, well, I want to have a fish over here that someone looks at next, whatever. Like that's when I will start thinking about those like the next degrees of like how I can add interest and variation into the image. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, cool, yeah. But it's all about what the piece needs because I'm always keeping in mind what's the purpose of the image. And, you know, this piece doesn't have a purpose. It could be anything, you know, kind of going for like a concept art vibe. But I've done so many different jobs that I have to really think about that sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, okay, how far does this need to go, you know? I'm just going in and I'm adding another layer of detail to like the light patterns on the water. Just because I really love how that looks. Like, I just think it looks so nice and pretty. I love painting light through water. And then something else that I can do is let me actually go ahead and do one more hard light layer and add some of these lights to the top of the shark here. So just like the same kind of pattern, just like I was doing on the surface, but on the shark itself. This will also make it feel like it's in the water more. Kind of like that. I guess there we go, yeah. And I guess like as a closing thing, especially for environments, I feel like sometimes it's so intimidating to like start environments, especially if any of you are like mainly character artists or like don't usually put your characters in scenes. When I was at that point when environments were like so intimidating and scary, the thing that really helped me was breaking it down into, okay, what is something that does feel achievable? What is something that I feel like I can do? And the reason I love this demo so much is because when you separate it out into all the steps, I feel like almost anyone can follow these steps from beginning to end. And you could do this for any subject. I always recommend really narrow your focus. So instead of thinking of, oh, well, I want to paint environments, that's everything in the whole world. It's like, okay, what's one type of environment that I can focus on for literally 3 months? Give yourself 3 months to really dive deep into one type of environment. Maybe it's a grassy field or a desert. Maybe it's the interior of a room. For me, water was the one that really motivated me to make environmental art. This is one of the reasons I love this demo so much, is because this is one of the first types of scenes that I felt really confident in. The thing for me, I know we're all the same, but sometimes what it is we need to believe that we can make something we like. Because for me, when I was struggling with environments and struggling with scenes, I didn't really believe that I could make something that I like. But instead of doing something here and there that I didn't really like that much and just trying a bunch of different things and never feeling satisfied, really digging in deep into one really simple type of scene, which for me was underwater stuff, and getting to the point where I was like, oh my God, I'm proud of this. I like how this looks. It gave me all the motivation I needed, because then I believed, oh my God, I can go through that learning process with every type of scene, because we all can. We could all go through the learning process. It'll be different lengths of time for everybody. But I think sometimes there's a thing where you just want to become good at everything. But sometimes, at least for me, I found that diving in really deep on a really narrow thing and focusing in on it, that's what actually gave me the motivation and the belief in myself to keep going. So anyway, yeah, thank you guys so much for coming and for being here. This was so fun.
Is learning digital painting overwhelming to you? Well, our Digital Painting Fundamentals course breaks it down into manageable steps, so you can build up an arsenal of techniques and tricks to elevate your process. You'll learn the digital basics, like how to use and make brushes, layers, blending modes, and adjustments. You'll see how to paint, compose, and work with color digitally versus traditionally, and see how professionals take these tools into industry jobs and how you can paint like a pro. You can get it at proko.com/digital painting.